الحمد لله رب السماوات ورب الأرض رب العالمين وله الكبرياء في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. الحمد لله الذي بنعمته تتم الصالحات. ربنا لك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا الأولين والآخرين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ملك الحق المبين وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صفيه من خلقه وخليله وأمين على وحيه. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وانظروا نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, all praise and glory and thanks are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We owe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everything we have, ma bikum min ni'matin fa min Allah. Anything that is going right, going well in your life is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any good news that comes to you, it's a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that should make you more thankful, more grateful, and more humble, and more responsible. Because the more Allah gives you, the greater will be your responsibility. Those who have more money have great responsibility than those who don't. Those who have better health have great responsibility than those who don't, etc. My respected brother and sister in Islam, even though the Jumu'ah is meant mostly for a reminder, some people think that things are repeated in Jumu'ah. That's the nature of our deen. If you read the Quran, you will find the story of Musa alayhi salam in so many surah. That repetition, no, it's not a repetition, because Quran is meant to be a reminder. It's come to Jumu'ah just so that we can either be reminded of something that we forgot, strengthen something that's started to be weak, but it's not necessarily, at least typical Jumu'ah, it's not necessarily like new knowledge every week. So it is meant mostly as, but in spite of this, we started last week a series of trying to understand our situation, how we ended up in this situation, and how do we get out of it? How do we change it? And just to summarize, start by saying that the key is to accept that we are in a terrible situation. And nothing wrong with this. Nations go through crisis. So it's not like, don't say this, and no, we should say it. We should accept the fact that, as just was mentioning, Quran, when it was revealed after Uhud, it doesn't say that it was a minor, no, it said musibah. It was a disaster, and it caused failure. You failed, and musibah. أولما أصابتكم مصيبة حتى إذا فشلتم. So seeing things the way they are. It's very helpful, by the way, even in our personal life and family life, to see things the way they are, and to stop this denial, because we cannot take it. It's like you go to a doctor and say, you know what, give me a better diagnosis, because I cannot take it. This is heavy. Now, a doctor telling you that you have a heart problem, say, you know what, can you make it better? Can you come up with, give me better? It doesn't help. So seeing things the way they are, accepting them, it's very important. At the same time, accepting or rejecting the fact that this is okay or this is normal. I know it's difficult. Accept reality, it is happening. It's bad, we are in a terrible situation. Our numbers in the world are shameful and embarrassing. When it comes to statistics, where we stand in education, where we stand in science, where we stand in economy, where we stand even in character and manners, our numbers are bad. So first thing, accept it. It is there. It has happened. So we are in that terrible situation. At the same time, never accept that it's okay or it's normal, because that's not where we belong. That's not the normal situation for us. So never accept that it is normal, And always remember the standard, where we are supposed to be, so that you can see the gap. And then you need to realize and believe that that gap must be closed. As I mentioned last time, it's not optional, and it is doable, bi'idhnillah. So it is not optional to close the gap between where we are and where we're supposed to be. Why it is not optional? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described us, designated a place for us. You can't fall short of it. If you fall short, then you have to work on closing that gap. Not lowering the standard and saying, well, it's okay. It's okay to be in this situation. No, working on closing the gap. We mentioned the two verses in which Quran tells us where we're supposed to be. كذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول عليكم شهيدا. That's Surah Al-Baqarah and in Surah Al-Hajj. وفي هذا ليكون الرسول شهيدا عليكم وتكونوا شهداء على الناس. It's very, very explicit. Quran says we made you into a balanced nation so that you will be so that you may bear witness to the truth before others, and so that the messenger may bear witness to you to the truth before you. That's in Surah Al-Baqarah. And in Surah Al-Hajj, so that the messenger can bear witness about you, and so that you can bear witness about other people. I cannot find any other interpretation of these verses or explanation except that you Muslims, your position among other nations should be the same like the position of the Prophet amongst you. It's a very simple. Quran uses the same terms. Your position in this world, your standing, should be the same like the Prophet amongst you. The Prophet was, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, was role model. You should be role models to others. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was mercy to humanity. You should be mercy to others. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was leader of your community. You should be leaders in this world, not in the back seat. So verses are very explicit. And now the question is what? The question is, we must understand where we are and how it happened so that we can fix it. There is no way you can understand your reality without the history. That's why even physicians will ask you about medical history. Do you have diabetes running in the family? Do you have this? Do you have, because to help them understand your situation. So your reality needs to be dissected, and also how and why we came to this point have to be understood. How and why we came to this point. Now we learned the Islamic approach. Learning the Islamic approach, we just talked about it, is to accept responsibility. قُلْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ أَنفُسِكُمْ. So after you accept the reality, it's bad, it's terrible, you reject it, it's not normal, it must be changed. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be pleased with us if He designates a place for us and we fall short. So therefore it must change. Now is it doable? Yes, it is. We are in a much better situation than the Arabs before Islam. Much better in terms of resources and number and everything. We're in much better situation. You know what? We are in much better situation than Europe before its Renaissance, when it was in horrible situations before they revived and before they will go ahead and progress. So it's a must. We should, and we can be in the day. It's doable to work on closing that gap. So when we start talking about the history, I said that there are two events in history that have shaped our lives until this point and shaped our minds. 2 milestones, starting with the Fitna al-Kubra, the bloody civil war that happened among the companions and Tabi'een, claiming the lives of tens of thousands of people in the span of days and weeks, tens of thousands of lives, and it's a big shock for Muslims, definitely. Any one of us if we're living there, it's going to be, at that time, it's going to be a big shock. We think of ourselves as the best ummah, etc., and we end up fighting each other and killing each other in huge numbers. It was a huge shock. And it had a lot of implications. The first and the worst implication is that it made Muslims look and yearn for stability and law and order at any cost, at any price. Up to this point, it's understood. When you see that chaotic situation, of course you want somebody to come and establish law and order. The mistake happened when the scholars legitimized that type of ruling and made it legitimate, which is hukum al-mutaghallib. Whoever comes to power, regardless of how they come, and establish law and order, regardless of how oppressive or how corrupt they are, doesn't matter. Establish law and order, we give them the stamp. They are legitimate. So we had a whole fiqh that was developed, and that was very unfortunate. Rather than accepting that situation temporary, as a temporary solution, and then start calling to go back to the system of Khulafa Rashideen, when there was shura, when there was leadership by consent, when there was transparencies, when there was accountability of rulers. It's a very different system. We went into a system that is family, one man makes absolute power, has absolute power, and that power will be inherited from father to son. We should never have accepted that to become or allowed to be permanent. Unfortunately, we did. Results, 12 centuries of that type of ruling. More than 12 centuries of that type of ruling. I'm going to talk today about, because that's the question that comes always when we have this discussion. So if you're saying that system of governance is bad, why it lasted so long? And why we had all those achievements in science and in architecture and in art? Why? So on the surface, it looks successful. First, we're going to have to accept that's not Islamic by any means. They call it khilafah, they call it whatever they want. Islam, the Islamic principles of governance, we get them from the life of Rasul and from the time of Khulafa Rashideen, not from Dawla Umayyah or Abbasiyya or any others. That's the Islamic. And if you think about it, you will see that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, as very strong leader, he was still transparent, he was still accountable, and he was ruling by consent. If the people decided to remove him, they could have removed him. So that's the system. That's where the Islamic principles were implemented. Unfortunately, we did not go back to that system. And unfortunately, we did not institutionalize it. It was implemented during Khulafa Rashideen, but it did not become institutions. We did not invent this idea of like parliament or election. We didn't. We have some simple tools because it was a small community, it was simple, but all the elements of contemporary democracy, they were there. Because they defined democracy as leadership by consent, the people who make decisions, and rulers, transparency, accountability, equal opportunity. All these were there in that system, so we had it. So, unfortunately, we allowed that to continue, and of course it has major consequences. Has major consequences on the minds. If you live under dictatorship for centuries, from one generation to another, read the book by Kawakibi. Abdurrahman al-Kawakibi has a small booklet talking about طبايع استبداد. What happens when people are ruled or accept dictatorship for a long time? Even their akhlaq will become spoiled. They learn hypocrisy, they learn cowardness, they learn putting masks, they learn everything under dictatorship. And we allow that to happen. You know what? You don't need to read Kawakib. Read the Quran. Read the Quran and why Quran was focusing on Bani Israel, the story of Bani Israel, and why Bani Israel did what they did in Quran. Quran was telling us basically that these people, they lived under oppression for so long to the point that even their personality was corrupt and spoiled. So in other words, Quran is telling us, don't make the same mistake. Don't tolerate dictatorship in the name of stability for a long time, because you're going to have the same consequences. Even your manners and your personality will be corrupt. So now, why it lasted so long, and why we had those achievements? And that's a very legitimate question, because people they think that because it lasted so long and because we had those achievements, it must be the right thing to do. Now, it lasted so long for a few reasons. Number one, the Khalifa, the one who comes to rule, was prepared from early childhood. They bring scholars to teach him, that Khalifa. They bring, he learns politics by sitting with his father. So they were trained very early on. There was a system to prepare them. Now, sometimes it worked, produced good persons, sometimes it didn't. But at least there was a mechanism. It's not like somebody comes out of the blue and start become a Khalifa. No, they were prepared. They were prepared very from childhood, teaching them all kinds of knowledge, teaching them this and that, and even politics, by sitting down, sitting with their fathers and learning politics. Can you please stop talking, please? So that's number one. Number two, yes, it was dictatorship, but it was not totalitarian regimes like the one that we have seen in recent time, the military regimes. So there was a margin for the society to operate. That's why we have the endowments, awqaf. Now, what is endowment? Endowment keeps the society independent from the government. That's why the totalitarian regimes that came after independence, the first thing they did, they abolished endowment. Because endowment gives power to the society. Awqaf makes the society independent. There are people who put money, their wealth, they put a lot of money in those awqaf for different reasons. So that continued, and that gave margin for the society. So it was a dictatorship, one-man show, absolute power, but at the same time it was not a totalitarian regime, meaning it did not suffocate the society. That's number one. Number two, there was some gentleman agreement between the rulers and scholars that as long as you don't grossly violate Islam, we're going to legitimize it. So that also helped keeping things in check. Number three, with all the deficiency in that system of governance, we are better than others. We were better than others. Others were in much horrible. The other empires and the other parts of the world, they were in terrible. So it's like a team that is winning, not because it is a good team, but because it is playing with others that are much weaker. So that's why that helped the system continue, because there was no real challenge, no real competition. And that's what happened later when Europe woke up. Now we collapsed. We collapsed in no time. Why? Because it was already happening. It's like Sulaiman alayhi salam, when he died, he was still relying on his stick until his stick was eaten by bugs, and then he fell. They didn't know that he already died. فما دلهم على موته إلا دابة الأرض تأكل من سأته. And we were in that situation. But it was not clear, number one, because there was no challenge, there was no competition. And number two, we have a strong government, but the society was weakening. Why? Because society does not flourish under oppression. There is no way. There is no way in the absence of freedom. You can see it nowadays. Which countries are doing much better? Countries where there is freedom. Where there is freedom and there is justice and there is... Which countries are doing horrible? Country where there is dictatorship. And that's a rule. That's rule from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that makes countries thrive when they have freedom and justice. People excel in everything. And when they are oppressed, that suppresses creativity. Now, why we had all those achievements in science, in medicine, in architecture until now? You see them in Spain, you see them in Iraq, you see them in Syria, in Turkey, you see them everywhere. Why? Why that happened? It happened because of the power of this deen that inspired those individuals to reflect, contemplate, and discover the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It was an individual effort. And you know what? In most of the time, it was suppressed. Because what we don't know, or we don't want to know, that for many religious scholars, in addition to the scientists, many religious scholars, including Malik, Shafi'i, Abu Hanifa, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal, all of them were tortured, jailed, and oppressed by rulers. You don't see this a lot focused on, but that was part of the history. They were jailed, they were beaten, they were tortured because of that system of governance. And then go and read the story, what happened to scientists, what happened to Ibn Sina that we brag about him, what happened to Ibn Haytham, the optics man, scientist, what happened to them. And you'll see the consequences. That part of the history, most of us, we don't pay attention to it. Why? Because we want to legitimize that type of governance. And some people nowadays, they want to bring it back. So, we need to re-establish Khilafah. What do you mean? And we want to bring someone to just control us and lead us the same way like the Khalifa Amawi or Abbasi said. What are you talking about? And I say, that's Islam. Because that's Islamic government. That's not Islamic governance. Islam is built on justice. There is no such thing that I'm ruling you because I'm the son of the so-and-so. No, you don't. You rule us when we choose and when we accept you. And that's what happened to the great companions. They were rulers by consent. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, people voluntarily they accepted him as a leader. Umar ibn Khattab, same thing. Nobody said that I am from this tribe or I am the so-and-so, then you have to listen to me. There is no such thing. So it is not an Islamic. As I said, it could have been justified as temporary measure because of that chaotic situation after the bloody civil war, but it should have never lasted so long. Now, we cannot undo that, but at least we learn our lessons. At least we don't call for that system to be brought back. And we reject this idea. And at least we know that's the consequence, that what we are facing is the consequences of that turning point. So these are the reasons why it lasted so long and why we had those achievements, so that should never be used as an excuse to say that was a good system, that's why it lasted so long, and that's why it produced those achievements. No. By the way, dictatorship can achieve. Nowadays, North Korea is doing so well in terms of weapons and etc. Dictatorship, because dictator can decide something at night and it becomes a law in the morning. They can get things done. What's the problem with it? It doesn't last. It's not sustainable. The day the regime collapsed, the whole thing, we have seen it in Iraq. There are so many achievements at the time in Iraq before the fall of the regime. But then everything collapsed in no time, and you see the Iraq in a terrible mess. Why? Because it was done, it was an individual decision, was not institutional. So even dictatorship, yes, they can get things done, they can achieve things, but still that does not make it right. It's like might does not make it right. The same thing, again, any achievement does not make dictatorship right. The second milestone and event that happened was also terrible. Again, it was all done out of good intention. I mean, those scholars that legitimize the system of governance, they have the best of intention. They want to save lives. They want to stop the bloodshed. So it's a very good intention, but unfortunately, terrible decision. And then the same thing happened after 2 or 3 centuries after the death of Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There was a call to stop ijtihad or freeze ijtihad or close the door of ijtihad. غلق باب الاجتهاد. Why? Because we are afraid that there will be bid'ah in Islam. We are afraid of deviation. So, what's the solution? So that's legitimate to be afraid and to be concerned, to protect Islam. But how you protect Islam? By freezing it? No. That's your food. You want to protect it, you freeze it. But Islam is protected by ijtihad. If you stop ijtihad, you make it detached from life. Because you stop it at a certain point in time, and life is going to continue evolving. And that's exactly what happened. So that idea that we have to stop thinking and only rely on the work of the madahib, ayyim al-madahib, mufassirin. Why? Because they know better. Why? Because they are closer to the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And what's the outcome? Freeze your mind. And what do you expect? When people freeze their minds, what do you expect? When people live under political oppression, lacking any freedom, and then on top of that, they freeze their minds, you can only get the situation that you see. So we're going to have to understand, so if we want to tackle it from the root causes, then we have to tackle those. Number one, that we should never accept this idea of dictatorship under any circumstances. And you can see that because we accepted those dictators for so long, when we tried to remove them, it was very costly. It was very costly because we accepted them for too long. A lot of them, they could have been toppled quickly, easily, the first years. But after 20 or 30 years, it's going to be very hard. They take roots. So we should never accept that. Of course, we have to be wise. Change, it doesn't mean that chaos. And we really have to stop swinging between dictatorship and chaos, because that's what we spent all our history. We spent our history swinging between dictatorship and chaos. A chaotic situation, and then you have a new state, a new dynasty comes and establish itself, impose itself on us, and then we accept it until they become weak, they collapse, we go into chaotic situation until another state establishes itself. And then we need to revive this idea of ijtihad, that Quran was meant to be guidance, not law. Quran meant to be guidance, not law, and should be interpreted and understood in the context. Quran is not theory. Quran should be implemented in the context. It has to be the verses. There are verses in Quran that do not, they are foundational. They are constant. They are khawabit. There are verses in Quran that may apply in some circumstances, may not apply in other circumstances. And that's the greatness of the Quran. Same thing for the hadith. So we have to revive, reopen that door of ijtihad so that we can understand our deen in the light of our context. Because nowadays we are producing a confused generation. We're telling them things from the past, and they are facing very different reality, and they are struggling. the poor people, they're struggling generation to reconcile between the teaching of the deen and the challenges of the reality. Why? Because we're teaching them an understanding of the deen that was frozen in history, and therefore it's very hard to reconcile it with the situation they're facing. And then, or we teach them an understanding that was developed in another country, in a very different context. So people here are relying on scholars in Saudi Arabia or in Pakistan. Can't. This religion is practical religion. It interacts with the reality so that it can fix it, so that it can fulfill this mission of Islam. You cannot take it from one era to another. And you cannot take it from one area of the world, one part of the world to another. Because people, the challenges that we are facing here are different than the challenges faced by anybody else. And we have freedom here guaranteed by Constitution. There are people, there are Muslims in the world, they don't have it. So they have to strive for it. For you, it's there. So the challenges that people face and the opportunities that people have, they are different. So we need to pursue the mission of Islam, fulfill the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but in our context, by respecting tawabit, but also fulfilling tawabit are things that are fixed in Islam, but fulfilling the maqasid of deen, fulfilling the purpose of deen. And one of the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is for us to be up there, not where we are now. That's muradillah. Huwa ijtabakum. The verse says, Huwa ijtabakum. He selected you for this honor. You can't fall short of it. So we need to understand why and how we came to this point, and then take charge, know that we should, and we can, bi'idhnillah, turn things around, and we can rebound. Bi'idhnillah, we have all the ingredients, we have all what it takes, and on top of it, and we are no less than any other nations in the world who made it, and on top of this we have great, inspiring and empowering religion that has produced great success stories in the desert with the Bedouins, illiterate, poor, small in number, fighting each other all the time, and this religion turning them into champions of great civilizations. You think Islam cannot do the same with the current situation of Muslims, which is a lot better? No, we can. It should, it is there, but it requires people who are serious, people who are committed, people who do everything they can, people who believe that they must and they can close that gap and be where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants them to be. وَتُوبُ إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّهُ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونتوب إليه. نعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. But dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, in other words, we need to revive the Islamic dream. We really have to believe in ourselves, believe in the role and the responsibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has assigned to us, and we believe that inshallah we can. Again, we should, and inshallah we can. This idea of ijtihad, this religion is meant so that there will be an interaction between three components until the day of judgment. That interaction should never stop. Between the text, nas, between the brain, and between the reality. See that triangle? That should never stop. We should always try to extract more guidance from the Quran, and we should always, because our brains are evolving, reality is evolving, but the text is constant. But the text can be interpreted also in different ways, in a different context. That's the power of this Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it as flexible guidance so that everybody can benefit from it. Wherever you are in a very advanced city or metropolitan area, or you are in the desert, you still can apply Quran, but you're not going to apply it exactly the same way. You're going to have to contextualize it because the context is very different. It doesn't mean that you're going to pray differently or fast differently. These are the things that do not change. But in talking about how do we fulfill that mission of Islah, that depends on the context. How we fulfill the purpose of Allah, on top of them comes justice, that depends on the context. So the starting point again, after accepting reality, accepting responsibility for it, accepting responsibility to change it, and then firmly believe, because without a dream, without a mission, we're going nowhere. That's what mobilizes people and unify them. And that's what happened at the time of Rasulullah. He instilled a mission in those companions. That's why they remained mobilized and united for many, many years. Non-stop. And that's the only way we can, because that model of Rasulullah was not meant to be one-time event that we keep always bragging about it. Whenever Muslims are asked nowadays, what are your achievements? Say, look at our history. No, what did you achieve? Because Quran tells us, تِلْكَ أُمَّةٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَلَكُمْ مَا كَسَبْتُمْ تِلْكَ أُمَّةٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَلَكُمْ مَا كَسَبْتُمْ. So that was a nation, that community passed away. What they earn belongs to them. What they achieve belongs to them. And what you earn belongs to you. So we're going to have to stop using our history and the seerah of Rasulullah as an excuse for our failure. That yes, we're not achieving much now, but look at our ancestors, what they did. No. What do you have to show for now? ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار